This is an important question because I think there is a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion with respect to how inflation is measured. And so I thank the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, the official average inflation, which is released by the Fiji Bureau of Statistics, in 2022 stood at 4.3%, while the year-end inflation for 2022 stood at 3.1% in December 2022. So, Mr. Speaker, said the average inflation from January to October is around 1.7%, while the recent year-on-year inflation for October 2023 stood at 4%. Mr. Speaker, said these are the official numbers that have been released by the Bureau of Statistics, which is the national office responsible for collecting and reporting statistics on Fiji. But let me, Mr. Speaker, Honourable Usumate will understand this because this would sound like a bit like Economics 101, but it's important for the people to understand this and the definition of inflation and how it's always been measured in Fiji. So inflation, Mr. Speaker, is the general increase in price of goods and services over a period of time, and usually over a year. For example, the current 4.0 inflation rate in October 2023 means that consumer prices are 4% higher when compared to a year ago in October 2022. That's what it means. A lot of people, Mr. Speaker, say unfortunately get this wrong because the percentage increase in price is compared to the same period a year before, not compared 2 years ago or 5 years ago or compared to the 1970s, because that would be completely wrong. And some people try and do that. They say, okay, the price was this in 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, when we say average inflation for the year, it means the average year on the inflation for 12 months. So for policy purposes, we generally use the year-on-year inflation and not the average. The other important point that I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is inflation is measured by what we call the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And CPI is based on a representative basket of goods and services that is purchased by the consumer with different weights. Different items have different weights assigned to individual products and services based on its importance. So right now with the Bureau of Statistics, for example, the CPI base that we are using now is 2014 base, Mr. Speaker, and there are 349 items in that basket, and they are categorized, and I want to mention those. So food and non-alcoholic beverages, the weight is 35%. Alcohol, tobacco and narcotics, it's 10%. Housing and utilities, 13%. Household finishing, clothing, footwear, 7%. Health and education, 9%. Transport, 14%. Communication and others, 8%. So, for example, if the food price, for example, has gone up by 8.6%, if you look at year-on-year price rise, by 8.6%, but the weight is 35%. So even a slight increase in the food items will show a much bigger inflation rate, Mr. Speaker. For example, hotels, the prices have gone by 11.6%, but the weight in the CPI basket for hotels and restaurants is only 2.98%. So while the price rise is much bigger there, the inflation rate, if it's looked at in the basket, will be much lower. Mr. Speaker, the point that I also want to make is that and a lot of people, are focusing on the budget. Yes, there are measures in the budget. We had 3 rates of VAT, 0, 9, and 15. We've kept the 0 rated on all the 21 food items. So there is no tax, no VAT increase on the 21 food items. Absolutely none. And in fact, for some of them, we have reduced the duties. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, I just got the list of food items in particular from the FCCC. 92, this is the list, 92 food items, the prices have gone down. And there are a number of factors why the prices have gone down there. One is, before COVID or during COVID, the prices has gone up by quite a bit because the freight cost had gone down. So the freight costs are also coming down, and those food items, the 21 food items that has 0 VAT and the freight cost has come down, some of the prices have gone down. So it's not as if all the products, all the different brands. So if you look at, for example, milk, all the brands of milk has actually gone down. The price has gone down. No, 1 or 2 in the quantity, but generally, if they look at this list, Mr. Speaker, if they care to look at this list, it's a public list. They will actually find that in some cases, the same quantity, the prices have gone down. So I just wanted to make this point, and they don't talk about it, Mr. Speaker, that some of the prices have actually gone down. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary question, Honorable Usmade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, grateful to hear from the Deputy Prime Minister that 92 items price has gone down, because he has mentioned a list of 200. So we look forward to reading about that 200. And the price of milk has gone down. He forgot to mention that it used to be 500 grams of milk. Now it's 450. The price has gone down. The quantity has also gone down. Mr. Speaker, sir, the ANZ just produced a report suggesting that the projected inflation for this year might be 6%, but they say that's understated. It'll be around 13%. Food manufacturers are saying that the production costs have gone up between 20 to 30%. So given this, if the projection is 6% and it's actually 13%, what will the ministry be doing? Will there be other mitigation processes that you will need to consider in order to help the people of this country, considering the fact that you cut the taxation rate on the richest people in this country but not the poorer, and you've raised VAT in a lot of different areas? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That's again a bit of a hogwash. Let me explain this. Since you raised the ANZ prediction, the recent report, Mr. Speaker, by Dr. Kisti Sen, I know him for years, and his inflation numbers, I understand that was probably the key motivation for the question. In fact, Mr. Speaker, what Kisti Sen is saying is that inflation in 2022 stood at 18 to 21%. They don't talk about that. And inflation in 2023 is around 13%. And let me state this very, very categorically, for ANZ and for everybody, that Dr. Kisti Sen is absolutely, completely wrong about that projection. And I'll explain why. And I'll explain that why. Because it is quite a ridiculous suggestion from ANZ economists, and because it's going to create wrong impressions, amongst the people. And Honorable Usamat is using that. And I'll explain to you why it's wrong. And ANZ really should be careful in making those kind of wild projections, about, I'm answering your question. Speaker said the methodology The methodology the gross value added and expenditure as a proxy for CPI inflation is completely incorrect, and is not used anywhere in the world to measure inflation. And so the projection that it will be 13% is based on the wrong method. The simple reason is that the GVA, the gross value added expenditure, and the CPI measure, Mr. Speaker, measure different things. And many items which are produced and sold in Fiji, included in the retail gross value added, are not part of the CPI basket. Not part of the CPI basket. So, for example, a very simple example, Mr. Speaker. If you look at hardware prices, the building materials prices have a separate index, which is known as the building material index. And that rose by 13% in 2022. So clearly, using that as a proxy for retail trade gross value added approach will be completely biased. They need to listen to this because they can explain to the people correctly. Because otherwise they'll go and lie, Mr. Speaker. And let me also explain. The Honorable Usumate talked about the mitigation measures. Mr. Speaker, obviously they don't talk about this because when they go out, they talk to the people, they just say, oh, prices have gone up. They don't talk about even when there is a list publicly put out by the FCCC that the prices have gone down for certain items, the list is there. They actually put out the detail of the brand, Mr. Speaker, that has gone down. They don't talk about it. But let me just answer this question that he raised about mitigation. When we started, this government, Mr. Speaker, started by recognizing well before the budget that the people were still transitioning from low income, loss of jobs. As soon as we came in, as a government, we allocated $50 million. We paid $200 each to 227,000 students in the country to get back to the school. Then, Mr. Speaker, when we came to the budget, we made sure that we did not raise VAT on the 22 food items. We added basic medicine. Mr. Speaker, we made sure that we increased the social welfare allowances by 25-15%. We made sure, Mr. Speaker, that we provided additional support and subsidies to farmers in the agriculture sector. We made sure, Mr. Speaker, that the sugarcane farmers, in the history of sugarcane farmers in this country, got the highest price, and we put $8 million. Mr. Speaker, Honorable Usumate talked about the fact that we reduced the tax for rich. He forgot to mention that we actually raised the company tax from 20 to 25%. We made sure, Mr. Speaker, that we did not touch the threshold. Almost 70 to 80% of the people in this country, Mr. Speaker, who earn below 30,000, we did not increase the tax. They are taking one little example of Fiji water and saying, oh, the tax on one irrelevant politician, or as the Honorable Prime Minister said, spent force, is still talking about it. And they forget that we they also forget that we wrote off $650 million, 53,000 families and the children. The burden of paying the debt every month, every week, every fortnight has been lifted from them. So all the mitigation measures that we put in to address any increase and Mr. Speaker, a lot of these prices, they talk about fuel price. During COVID, their government, when the fuel prices went down, instead of letting the people benefit from the reduction, they put another additional 20%. And it was 40%. And when we were raising it before the election, then they reduced the 20%. Now they are talking about another 20%.
Don't know what I'm talking about.
This is the lie and the hogwash that they create, when they go out there, Mr. Speaker. This is a government which is conscious, which is aware, and we have put in the appropriate mitigation measures, and if need be, we will put more. Plus, Mr. Speaker, we have put in another additional $45 million, and every student from preschool to Form 7 with income less than 50,000, before the school opens next year, will get $200 each. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.